Carl gripped the wheel of his chair, feeling the worn rubber under his hands, and tried to steady his breathing. The heat of the afternoon pressed down on him, making the sweat bead at his hairline and run down his neck. He could hear the distant sound of engines before he even saw them coming, and a sinking feeling crawled up his spine. The sound grew louder and closer. The vibration in the concrete under his wheels made him tense up as he glanced around for anyone who might help, but the lot was almost empty. The few people inside the gas station seemed absorbed in their tasks, pretending not to notice the small, tense figure struggling outside. The first biker appeared at the edge of the lot, his leather jacket catching the sunlight, his face hidden behind dark lenses, and a smirk that made Carl feel smaller than he already felt. The engine of his bike rumbled as he leaned it slightly to the side and stared at Carl as if daring him to respond. Another biker pulled up beside, the first one revving his engine just enough to make the tires spin a little on the hot asphalt. The sound was sharp and loud, and it made Carl flinch. He gripped the wheel tighter and forced his legs to stay put, even though the shaking in his body begged him to retreat into the truck for safety. A third biker came around the corner, waving his hand and laughing a cruel and empty laugh. It was the kind of laugh that sounded like it belonged in a movie that you never wanted to be part of. Spat on the ground a little too close to where Carl had parked his wheelchair and muttered something about how easy it would be to push him over. The veteran felt the blood rush to his face, and a sense of helplessness clawed at his chest. He wanted to say something sharp to defend himself, but every word felt heavy in his mouth, as if the air itself weighed against him. Carl looked around for some kind of shield, a countermeasure, anything that might give him even a hint of control he could see. The stacks of windshield washer fluid near the entrance of the gas station, but reaching them would mean leaving the relative safety of his truck and stepping fully into the path of the bikers. The asphalt burned under his wheels. The tires of the motorcycles left marks on the concrete as they inched closer, taunting him with every turn of their engines. He could feel the sweat on his palms, making his grip slippery, and he cursed himself for not installing the handbrakes he always promised. Himself he would fix someday. One biker called out to him using a name that was not his own, mocking his service, his injuries, and even the medals on his truck. He tried to ignore it, but the sound of the words scraping across the air made his chest tighten. The veteran gritted his teeth and tried to focus on counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, each tick of time dragging like it had a weight of its own, as if the sun and the heat and the motorcycles combined to slow the world down, just to make him feel more trapped. The shadows of the bikers stretched long across the asphalt. The reflection of chrome and black leather glinting in the sunlight made Carl blink against the glare. He felt trapped between the truck and the lot as the bikers began to circle slowly like predators testing their prey. Every laugh and shout a new wave of pressure against his back. He kept telling himself he had faced worse. He had fought battles overseas and come home with scars that people like this could never understand yet. Even so, he could feel the tension building in his chest, threatening to spill over into panic. A woman walked out of the gas station clutching a bag of groceries, her eyes widening as she saw the scene. She hesitated. On the sidewalk, unsure if she should intervene or retreat, the bikers noticed her, and one of them called her a name that made her drop the bag. She scrambled to gather her items and retreat inside the store. Her fear mirrored Carl's own, but he could not afford the distraction. He could only focus on the bikers and the moment stretching in front of him like a thin rope over a cliff. The veteran's mind raced through options, trying to find a way to end the confrontation without escalating it further yet. He knew that any movement could be misinterpreted. The bikers leaned in their seats, their boots scraping against the asphalt. The scent of gasoline and sweat filled the air, making him dizzy. He felt the heat of the sun pressing down. On his shoulders, his cap sliding forward slightly, he adjusted it with one hand and tried to make himself appear smaller, hoping somehow they would lose interest. Suddenly, one of the bikers revved his engine sharply, the sound slicing through the air like a knife. The vibration shook the ground under Carl's wheels. He flinched and instinctively pushed his chair backward, only to realize he was trapped between the truck and a fuel pump. The metal glinted in the sunlight, reminding him that a wrong move could lead to injury, or worse. He felt his heart hammering in his chest and tried to force his breathing to slow. He counted silently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and tried to find the calm that had always carried him through difficult times. The group of bikers began to laugh in unison, a sound that filled the empty corners of the gas station and reverberated against the metal siding of the store. Their voices grew louder and more mocking, the teasing about his body, the wheelchair, the way he moved his voice trembling. Carl clenched his jaw and kept his eyes down, but inside he felt a fire kindling a small, stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished by cruelty. He reminded himself that he had survived worse. He had fought. In places that smelled of smoke and blood, he had endured pain that could not be described yet. Here he was, being tested again by the simplicity of mean people and their desire to assert power over the weak. He remembered the training he had received. Overseas, how every situation required assessment, patience, and composure, how a soldier learned to measure the opponent and wait for the precise moment to act. He held that thought close, trying to transform the fear into strategy, imagining the bikers, not as people, but as moving obstacles that he could outmaneuver. Even if physically he was limited, he scanned the lot quickly, noting the position of each person, every biker, every vehicle, every possible exit. The mind was sharper than the body, and if he could survive with his mind intact, the body would follow. Carl's thoughts were interrupted by the loud kick of a motorcycle backfiring. Startling him, his hands tightened around the wheel. He took a deep breath. The air tasted dry and metallic. In his mouth, and he felt the sweat on his neck sliding down his spine, he noticed the license plates of the bikes. 1, 2, 3, he made mental notes, every small detail that might matter later. The smell of leather, the scuff marks on boots, the glint of rings on fingers, everything catalogued meticulously as if recording for later assessment. The lead biker moved closer, circling slowly, his shadow falling across Carl's knees. The veteran looked straight ahead, ignoring the sneer and the words that came spitting from his mouth. He refused to rise to the bait, refused to give them the satisfaction of fear visible on his face, but the tension inside him mounted, the heat, the sound, the humiliation, all pressing in like the walls of a collapsing building. He held himself steady and waited, counting the seconds in a slow, rhythmic pulse, in and out, hoping that somehow this ordeal would end soon, or that something would shift to change the direction of the moment. The distant rumble of more engines approached, faint at first like a whisper of wind, but growing steadily louder. Carl could not take his eyes from the bikers immediately around him, yet the sound pricked at his ears, curiosity mixing with cautious hope. He adjusted, the chair slightly feeling the rubber tires grip the asphalt. He considered the absurdity of the scene, how a simple stop at a gas station could turn into this theater of intimidation. Yet he reminded himself that the world was often absurd and unfair, and that the only control he had was in his mind, in his breathing, and in the choices he made. A sudden shout from one of the bikers made Carl flinch again, the insult sharp and biting, aimed to provoke anger. He kept his jaw tight, held his hands firm on the wheels, refusing to let the voice break his composure. The sweat on his brow dripped into his eyes and stung. He wiped it quickly with the back of his hand and kept counting silently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, reminding himself of every lesson learned in hardship and training, every moment of patience cultivated over decades of struggle. He felt the world shrink to the lot, the bikers and his own body. He could hear nothing else. The air itself seemed heavy and thick, every movement of the bikers measured in his mind, catalogued in detail. He had to survive this moment intact. He had to endure this until it passed, until help came, or until the situation resolved itself in some way that would not. end in injury or humiliation, beyond repair. He closed his eyes briefly, imagining the small victories of past battles, reminding himself that he was still here, still standing, still resisting. And then he felt the vibration before he saw it. Another set of engines approaching, distant but growing louder still. He opened his eyes and looked toward the horizon, squinting against the sunlight, and wondered who or what would arrive in time to shift the balance of the scene, who might turn the laughter into hesitation, who might restore some sense of order. And Carl gripped the wheel of his chair tighter, leaning slightly forward, ready for whatever came next, and waiting for the moment when the tide would change. The bikers had not yet noticed the distant rumble growing louder like thunder rolling across the empty highway. Carl felt his chest tighten and tried to steady his breathing, counting silently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the heat pressed down on his shoulders, and the smell of gasoline mixed with sweat filled his nostrils. He gripped the wheels of his chair tighter, willing himself to remain calm even as the mocking voices circled closer. The sound of the engines made the ground vibrate under his tires. The metal of the truck felt warm under his palms, and he felt trapped between the asphalt and the approaching motorcycles. One of the bikers leaned closer to him, a smirk cutting across his face, his boot scraping the ground inches from the wheel. Carl felt a surge of tension ripple through his body. He remembered every lesson from his service: how to measure threats, how to remain still, and how to choose the exact moment to act. The biker spat on the ground close enough to startle him, but Carl did not react. He clenched his jaw and focused on the rhythm of his breathing, the inhale and exhale steadying the panic building inside. The mocking laughter continued. One of them reached toward Carl's cap and tossed it aside, a cruel gesture meant to provoke and humiliate. He tried not to flinch, but the motion caught him off guard. He saw it roll across the asphalt, a small, fragile object in the path of the bikers. One of them kicked it lightly as if testing how far it would go, and the veteran felt a flash of anger rise up inside him. The heat, the humiliation, the powerlessness, all mixing into a tight knot in his chest. He forced himself to sit still and remind himself that acting out would only escalate the danger. Carl remembered the late nights on base when they trained him to respond under pressure to remain calm, while the world around him seemed to descend into chaos. He recalled the drills where every detail mattered: the glint of metal, the smell of oil, the sound of approaching danger, the vibrations in the ground, and the way small movements could be read as aggression or submission. He cataloged the bikers' movements in the same way, mentally marking every detail like notes on a page, every tattoo, every scar, every ring, every glance, every gesture. A sudden shout came from behind the bikers, a voice unfamiliar but commanding. It made them hesitate briefly. Carl felt a spark of hope mixed with anxiety. He did not know who it was, but the sound made the bikers glance. Around their posture stiffened slightly. The veteran's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the distant rumble of engines was not random. It was purposeful and approaching fast. He adjusted his chair slightly, leaning forward, keeping his eyes on the lead biker, noting the way his fingers twitched and the way his head turned toward the horizon, every subtle movement cataloged and analyzed. He reached quietly for his phone tucked into his lap, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface. The bikers were too close for him to raise it openly, but a small, discreet movement allowed him to dial the number silently. His heart pounding, the tension in his body coiling like a spring ready to release. He counted the seconds again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and held his breath as he waited for the connection to go through his mind, raced through possibilities of what would happen if they noticed he was calling help, if the bikers attacked before the call connected, if he had misjudged the timing of his backup. The bikers noticed a small movement. One of them laughed loudly, thinking Carl was reacting in fear. He leaned forward in his chair, slightly pretending to shrink smaller than he already was, a calculated gesture, to seem submissive. But inside his mind, he was working through strategies, assessing angles, escape routes, and potential allies. The lead biker circled closer, revving his engine as if to assert dominance. The vibration under the wheels rattled Carl's teeth and made the muscles in his arms tense. The smell of leather and gasoline filled his nostrils, making him feel both nauseous and alert at the same time. The veteran's thoughts flicked briefly to the medals pinned to his truck, reminders of past sacrifices, reminders that he had survived worse. He repeated the mantra in his mind: survive, endure, wait, act. Later he cataloged the movements of the bikers again, noting the small shift of weight, the slight turn of the head, the pattern in which they circled him, and the laugh that came too easily and too cruel. He knew that one misstep could escalate the situation beyond control, and he kept his body still as a stone, focusing on the moment. The distant rumble grew louder, the vibrations traveling through the asphalt, like a warning drumbeat, and Carl could see the glint of chrome in the distance, a dozen motorcycles appearing on the horizon, growing larger. With every second, he felt the heat of hope flare in his chest, mixing with the fear and tension of the present moment. He adjusted his chair slightly, keeping the phone in his lap, his fingers poised, ready to press the speaker if needed. The bikers around him noticed the change in his posture, and one muttered something under his breath, confused by the subtle shift. The lead biker revved his engine sharply, cutting through the tension like a knife. The sound was deafening, making Carl flinch slightly, but he remained still, counting silently in his mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He could feel the rhythm of the approaching engines syncing with the pounding of his heart. The vibration under his wheels like a warning signal, telling him that the situation was about to shift dramatically, and he had to stay alert and ready for whatever came next. The mocking laughter continued, but now tinged with uncertainty. One of the bikers glanced over his shoulder. Noticing movement in the distance, the veteran's heart surged with cautious relief. He had counted on backup, he had hoped for intervention. He had trained his mind for patience and endurance, and now the approaching riders were the unknown variable that could restore balance. The wind carried the sound of their engines closer and closer, making the air heavy and electric with anticipation. Carl's hands were steady on the wheels. He adjusted slightly, preparing for movement if necessary, his mind cataloging every small detail of the scene, the position of the bikers, the trucks in the lot. The fuel pumps, the scattered cap on the asphalt, every small variable accounted for. He felt the tension coiling inside him, ready to spring at the precise moment when advantage could be taken. His breathing remained steady as he anticipated. The moment when help would arrive and the bikers would realize that their power over him was about to end. The distant engines roared now, filling the lot with thunderous sound. The vibration traveled up through Carl's chair and into his body, felt the heat of the sun on his back and the sweat trickling down his temples. His hands remained firm, gripping the wheels. He could see the glint of chrome catching sunlight as the incoming riders accelerated. The mocking bikers started to glance nervously at each other, their confidence wavering. Their previous amusement replaced by unease, the veteran stayed low, calm, cataloging every reaction, noting every sign of fear building in his adversaries. Carl realized in that moment that control had shifted. The balance of power was about to change. The moment he had counted on had arrived. He kept his posture steady, still sitting low in his chair, and waited for the confrontation to end, not through force from him, but through the arrival of those who understood loyalty, courage, and the unspoken bond of shared struggle. The roar of engines grew deafening, and the bikers who had circled him now began to hesitate, uncertain how to act as the veteran remained motionless and watchful, ready for the resolution to unfold. The roar of the incoming motorcycles shook the air and vibrated through the asphalt. Carl remained seated in his chair, eyes fixed on the horizon, heart hammering in anticipation. Every muscle coiled ready for the final shift. The mocking bikers froze mid-laugh, their confidence draining as the approaching riders grew closer. Their engines a thunderous chorus that demanded attention. The veteran felt a flicker of relief mixed with adrenaline as the balance of power began to tilt. The incoming riders came into view, a dozen men on motorcycles, each one wearing the insignia of the Veterans Club, their faces set in determined expressions, their movements precise and unified. Carl recognized a few of them. From past events, others were strangers, yet the bond between them was visible in the way they rode side by side. The mocking bikers glanced at each other uncertain, unsure of what to do. The laughter that had filled the lot moments ago was replaced by nervous murmurs and shifting weight, their bravado fading under the presence of those who commanded respect. Carl felt the sweat on his brow mix with the heat of the day as he watched the newcomers encircle the lot, the sound of engines echoing off the buildings, creating a tense drum beat that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. The veterans dismounted slowly, their eyes scanning the scene. Each gesture deliberate and controlled. The bikers who had harassed him looked from one to another, their confidence replaced by fear. A knot of tension coiled in the air as silence hovered just beneath the roar of engines. The leader of the veterans stepped forward, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes sharp and calculating. He nodded once. Toward the mocking bikers, a silent warning, a message unspoken yet understood. The bikers took a half step back, unsure how to respond. The veteran watched from his chair, gripping the wheels tightly, his breathing steadying the humiliation he had endured moments before, now mingled with a strange sense of vindication. He had waited, he had endured, he had survived, and now those who understood loyalty had arrived to enforce justice. The mocking bikers muttered under their breath. One of them tried to rev an engine, but the sound seemed weak compared to the chorus of the veterans, their posture defensive. They shifted from foot to foot, glancing around, searching for a way out. Carl felt the tension in the lot thrum like an electric.